Joining me now is a first-time guest. He texted me the other day, said, hey, I was watching your broadcast where you were interviewing Susan Swift about the abortion abolitionist movement, something I didn't even know about till last week. Shame on me. I guess I should have known about it, but I can't keep up with everything. As I began to read about it, I started to recognize some of the people involved. Some of them are Reconstructionists. Some of them are into Dominion theology. Some of them definitely, with their hyper-Calvinism, want to merge, I think, the government with religion for a theocracy. Not something I'm interested in doing. That's not in my theology or my eschatology. I also cringed when I heard that some of them are saying, well, let's throw women in prison that have had abortions. And I'm thinking, well, what about the men? What about the 22, 23-year-old, 24-year-old boyfriend that gets a 17-year-old pregnant and drags her there to cover his tracks, or a mom that drags a daughter there, or an aunt or a relative? I thought, is this really where we want to go? Or if we want to be consistent, what about the men? What about the doctors? And so I also wondered if, again, as I watch it in the media, this isn't being used by the leftist and the Marxists to portray pro-lifers as what exactly the government in many cases wants to do, as unhinged, unreasonable people that are basically domestic terrorists. And so my position is we need to be very careful. The other thing I read is that some of them are such purists in that they are not for heartbeat bills. The bills and legislation related to, well, as soon as a heartbeat is detected, you cannot terminate the life of that baby. And others say, no, we should go all the way at conception. When do you believe life begins, Brannon? I believe it begins at conception. But if we can't get legislation like that, would we not take the heartbeat bill and save as many babies as we can? William Wilberforce, he had legislation up to outlaw slavery. He couldn't get everything he wanted. He had to come back around, lighten it up a little bit, and get what he could. And look at what happened. And it spread over here to America and ended slavery. These are simply, I think, tactics of being wise, as a serpent, as gentle as a dove, and being as aggressive as we can in the defense of the unborn child, which, by the way, in the Greek, the word for baby inside the womb and the word for the baby that God uses outside the womb is the same. So to God, whether in the womb, outside of the womb, it is a baby. Absolutely it is. And we're thankful for technologies like ultrasounds that are causing more women to realize this is not just some blob of tissue. That is a child. Joining me tonight is Jason, who said, hey, I'd like to come on and make sure people understand what it is we're doing, our group is doing, and maybe where they disagree with some of the groups I was talking about. As I said last week, I'm not painting with a broad brush to put everybody in the same category. And I don't think Jason is in the same category with some of these folks. And so I said, well, come on the broadcast and let our audience hear from you. Jason, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, Brandon, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me on and giving me the opportunity to come on and to talk about these important issues.
Absolutely. I watched one of your videos this afternoon as well. I'll play a little bit of it because I think there's some key legislation coming up in some key states. Now, do you refer to yourself as an abortion abolitionist? Is that a term you use?
I like the term. Yeah, I think there's value in the term, but I'm not married to the term either. I think that it's a good distinction to draw between what we call the pro-life establishment, or what many for years what we've called the kind of the fake pro-lifers, right? There's been for many years people that call themselves pro-life, and yet when they get in office, of course, they do the exact opposite.
That's
or they
true.
do the bare minimum.
Yep, that's
and
true.
So a lot of what we've been trying to do is figure out how do we expose the fake pro-life people out there that have gotten into positions of power, that wear the name Republican, call themselves conservative, and campaign as pro-life, and then they betray us. And so I think abolitionist is a useful term. We've also used the term like 100% pro-life or principled pro-lifer. There was the personhood movement that drew that distinction between sort of the pro-life establishment and folks who are for real full personhood of the preborn child. So the real distinction in what we're trying to advocate for is simply this. We want to see legislation that simply treats a preborn child in the same way that we treat born children. Simple equal justice and equal protection. And so we have bills of equal protection that we seek to get passed and have been advocating for, and of course advocating for what we think is that biblical position of the full humanity and full value, worth, and dignity of a preborn child as they're made in the image of God.
I like the one you used a while ago, principled pro-life. I like that one. You 100% pro-life. I like all those. I guess my concern, and I would have no problem with abortion abolitionist if it hadn't been now dirtied up by some of these people talking the way they are, and some of them, wanting to create a Christian town. We want to create a Christian town. I mean, I think everybody would like to live in a town that has Christian values. But I think in this sinful, fallen world, we're not going to have Christian towns, right? I hope we could elect people to city council that are Christians, that uphold parental authority, religious liberty, religious freedoms, and the other things that we so appreciate. But, I look at some of these guys that are, the way they're talking, some of them calling for a, quote, Christian town. I know it's been out there that they have used the C word when talking about women. I'm like, are you kidding me? Their language isn't that great. They seem to sit around and drink liquor and smoke cigars and talk about their hyper-Calvinism. And I'm thinking, what is this going to be? A John Calvin Geneva where you're going to crucify people or burn them at the stake if you disagree? I'm not interested in those people. Those people, I think, are dangerous to the church. They're dangerous to the gospel. I think they have a works gospel. Most of them, I think, invited the wrong JC into their heart. They invited John Calvin, not Jesus Christ. And those people, frankly, scare me to death. I think a lot of them are unhinged mentally, and I've dealt with a lot of them. Now, I'm not talking about your Reformed, Charles Ryrie, and many of the other great Reformed thinkers. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about this brood of hyper-Calvinists today that are pushing this and talking the way they are. That group, I'm afraid, is damaging the pro-life movement. I'll let you respond to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the abolitionist movement has grown into somewhat of a diverse movement, and there are some guys in the abolitionist movement that I don't associate with. And there are people.
That's a good way of putting it. Not associating with. I wouldn't either.
So, this is sort of epidemic of modern evangelicalism.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Social media has enabled young, immature, inexperienced men to rise to positions of quote unquote influence and to get a platform that they really haven't earned. And so I think you see this sort of across the board in evangelicalism with a lot of different movements. You see a lot of immature young men getting on social media, drawing a lot of attention to themselves and doing a lot of damage to the body of Christ, a divisive spirit, a hypercritical spirit, and oftentimes making mountains out of molehills theologically in some regards, or just taking their pet doctrines and using them as a club to beat up other believers for. So, our ministry, our organization that I run is called Operation Save America. We formerly were Operation Rescue in the front lines of the rescue movement going back 35 years ago. And so we've been a movement that has tried to stand on principle and really just take seriously that question of what would Jesus command us to do in a society that is killing preborn children? How should we act? And we certainly should take action, and we certainly should take it seriously, and we should love our neighbor as ourselves. We should go and act as we would want others to act on our behalf if it was our children or our family member who was going to be killed. And so a lot of what we've tried to do is stir the apathy of the church. And so sometimes, of course, you make enemies when you call people to action and when you reprove apathetic Christians or cowardly Christians. I mean, let's be honest, right, Brandon? There's a lot of cowardice in the pulpit.
Yes, there are.
A lot of emasculated and effeminate men in the pulpit. And so, when you stand up and just simply say strong biblical truths and as lovingly and as graciously as you can do that, you're going to get attacked, you're going to get vilified, and you're going to get slandered. So, our organization has really, I think, been, one of the organizations that's been on the forefront of what I would say is a biblically centered and gospel-centered approach to how we fight this issue. And so there's people in the abolitionist movement, this is a more recent movement, who certainly, I think, need to be corrected for some of the things that you pointed out, just I'd say immature behaviors, divisive behaviors. That there needs to be some mature, godly men helping to lead and shepherd that movement. The guy that used to run our ministry, Rusty Thomas, is one of those kinds of men that just is a great shepherd of men. You mentioned a guy a few days ago on your show, Jeff Durbin, if that name rings a bell. Jeff is a friend of mine. And I think if you got to know Jeff, you'd find him to be a very godly man. He's not in that category of the sort of unruly, bombastic, schismatic kind of abolitionist type of person. Jeff is a godly man, walks with a lot of humility. He's a good, solid biblical pastor of a Reformed Baptist church, and they have a great leadership team that faithfully shepherd a great congregation, and they do a lot of phenomenal evangelistic work and ministry on the streets. So there's a lot of really good people involved in this movement, And in what we're trying to do really is just simply say, hey, let's treat this for what it is. It's the murder of little children. And you'd be amazed, Brandon, how many pro-life leaders are afraid to even call abortion for what it is, murder.
No, I have no issue with that, it being called murder. But let me ask you a couple of things. I think that we've got the full spectrum here. How about the idea of some of them that I've read? I've gone and read some of their articles and to verify and check it, not trusting some media outlet. The idea of throwing women in prison that have had an abortion. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've written and talked about this for many, many years, and this has been a problem in the pro-life movement that I think has led to the continued killing of thousands of little babies in our most conservative pro-life states. Right now, Brandon, in every single state in this country, Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, a mother can kill her child with legal immunity and impunity in every single state. So we're being told by pro-life leaders who are fundraising and claiming victory that we've banned abortion in 14 states. Now, they have passed abortion bans in 14 states, and we're thankful for that. But every single one of them explicitly exempts mothers from any criminal sanctions. I think that's a gross error. It's on its face unjust. Now, I think we all recognize that there are times women are coerced, and our laws already take that into account. No mother is going to who's coerced or where there is genuine ignorance or she's been deceived and lied to. That's all going to be the discretion is there for prosecutors and judges and juries in how that trial would play out.
So if you have a 24-year-old, 25-year-old guy dragging a 16, 17-year-old to get an abortion to cover his statutory rape, you wouldn't be saying, let's throw the 16, 17-year-old in prison.
No, absolutely not. So our laws don't exempt anybody. So I know you mentioned, hey, what about the men? Well, 100%. One of the things that I like to talk about is how abortion really is more of a man's issue. It was 7 men on the Supreme Court, of course, that gave us Roe versus Wade, and 50 male governors that saw its implementation. But more importantly, as men, God calls us to be protectors, right? I mean, I care about this issue. I have 8 daughters. I have a very strong.
Do you have any boys?
I have 3 boys as well. Okay. Yes, I have 11 beautiful children, and so
wow.
I had a girlfriend.
Wow, and they're all biological, not adopted.
Yes, sir. That's me and my wife.
Not that adopting would be a problem, but I'm just saying, wow,
right.
11 children. Wow.
Yeah, that's why I got some gray hair coming in here. But I think what people don't realize.
How many grandkids you got, by the way?
Not yet. My oldest is 21, so she's Lord willing going to get married fairly soon.
You are going to have a Pascal of grandchildren.
Yes, I'm ready for the grandparent stage. So, Brandon, the thing that we're simply trying to say is hey, in a state like Mississippi or Alabama, for example, very strong pro-life sentiment there in the population. Thousands of babies are still being killed legally with immunity and impunity. We can close that loophole and save thousands of lives now by just simply having our laws not explicitly exempt a whole class of people. I mean, think, for example, of a female abortion doctor went and got an abortion. I mean, she obviously knows what she's doing. She was an abortion doctor.
Right.
She would have legal immunity in our most conservative pro-life states. That's a problem. And so, the good thing is a lot of people are coming around on this issue. Lila Rose, for example, with Live Action, Abby Johnson, a friend of mine, Scott Klusendorf, have all said that, hey, yeah, this is a problem since Dobbs. We need to tighten this up. The pro-life movement's been getting pushed around. We're one of the weakest lobbying groups in the country. We get bullied, pushed around. We get rolled over and played so easily. And we need to wake up to that and learn how to play some hardball politically and how to win political fights. And one of these the low-hanging fruit is to simply close this massive loophole and establish equal justice for preborn children in our most conservative pro-life states. And
you would agree, though, but you would agree that there are some people in the movement that are not being as reasonable as you are tonight in what you're explaining.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's indicative. Like I said, social media enables anybody to grab a microphone, right? And so, but I think that the folks that would call themselves abolitionists, that are pastors that have been in this fight for multiple decades. Like I've been 27 years in the pro-life movement, been in pastoral ministry for 20 years, have run a business for 20 years, and so my heart is that of a father. Discipleship is messy business, and it takes time. There's going to be a process, as you said, where we don't get everything we want right at this moment. And so there's a
So
balance
would
between
you be in
and-
favor of heartbeat legislation? I mean, have you supported heartbeat legislation? If that's all
Well,
you can get, would you go for that in states?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's say, for example, California passed a heartbeat bill tomorrow. Would I be upset? Absolutely not. I'd say, wow, what happened in California? That's some really amazing shift in trajectory there. But let's look at what actually happens and how these fights play out. So we have a handful of states that have heartbeat bills right now. South Carolina, Iowa, Ohio did, Georgia, Florida. Every single one of those states, Brannon, the abortion rate has been almost completely unaffected. So heartbeat bills don't actually really functionally save lives. What they actually sadly do is they pacify our angst and give us the appearance of giving a victory when we don't. It's actually in every one of those states, the better pro-life groups and abolitionist groups like ours were pushing for a full life of conception or full equal protection bills. What the political establishment was trying to do is they wanted to do the bare minimum and do that which was going to upset the status quo the least. And so a heartbeat bill was a way for them to do that. It was the political establishment, the Republican establishment, that really oftentimes led by people who are bought and paid for by special interest groups. They don't really care about social issues, the preborn, and Christian values, right? They're beholden to big pharmaceutical companies, big insurance companies, and special interest groups of all sorts. And they're saying, how can we keep our pro-life credentials and bona fides while doing the bare minimum? And so the heartbeat bill was sort of a tool to accomplish that. It has been post-Dobbs. Pre-Dobbs, the heartbeat bill was simply a tool started in Ohio to try to challenge Roe. It was hoped that a heartbeat bill would work its way up to the courts, to the Supreme Court, and be a tool and a vehicle to overturn Roe. But post-Dobbs, the way that a heartbeat bill has been used in every state where it has been passed, it has been a tool of the political establishment, not to do the best we can, but to do the least that we can while pretending we're doing something. And yes, I would oppose that. It's wrong. Because it's like I said, it doesn't actually save lives. Abortion clinics are wide open, parking lots filled up in every state that has a heartbeat bill. And then additionally, we're miseducating the public. If you think about and you talk to the average person on the street, talk to pro-life people, you're going to get 10 different answers about what it even means to be pro-life. I'm pro-life, but I think rape and incest, it should be okay to kill a baby. I'm pro-life, but I don't know that it should be criminal. I'm pro-life, but it's when the baby feels pain, 20 weeks or something. So where did all this confusion and muddle-headedness come from? Certainly some of it has come from our own pro-life legislative efforts, where we're contributing to the confusion of the population. Human life does not have value because it has a heartbeat. I mean, it's an important aspect of human development in the womb, but a human life has value because they're made in the image of God and they are alive. They're a living human being, right? Sperm meets egg, human reproduction has taken place. A woman has reproduced, and you have a living human life that is valuable, should be loved and protected from that moment forward. And I think that's what we're failing to teach in our pulpits and in our legislative endeavors. And so we're responsible for a lot of the confusion that's out there, sadly.
I guess, all I would come back to is what I said before. A group like yours, if you went as 100% principled pro-life, then that, to me, would separate you from the other I'm hearing that caused me great concern last week when I was talking about some of these people that I didn't name, but I'm describing what they're saying, how they're acting, how they're behaving. So I guess that my advice would be to win people over like me and a lot of my audience, I wouldn't use abortion abolitionist. I would go to principled pro-life or something to distinguish you from these other people that I think are doing a really poor job representing their case, unlike you've done tonight. You've done a very straightforward, reasonable approach to this tonight.
Well, thank you. And there's other guys that do the same thing. For example, I think you mentioned Doug Wilson. He has what he calls a term smash mouth incrementalist.
Right.
And that's kind of guys that, hey, we want to get full equal protection, but we'll take what we can get along the way. So there's a lot of different views sort of out there. I'm not hung up on labels. I think that we need to articulate our principles clearly, stand firmly, and trust the Lord to bless our efforts as we display courage, principle, and seek to love our neighbor as ourselves and to love him. And the best way we're going to get the best we can get is if we ask for the most, right? If we start out with only asking for half the enchilada, we're probably going to get a quarter of it,
Right.
So why not start out and say, hey, these are our principles. This is what is morally and logically consistent. Protect every human life. But it's not a hard argument to make. Sadly, I don't know why so many Republican leaders are struggling to make that argument, right? But I mean, they're falling all over themselves and running away from this issue, sadly. But to simply say, hey, we believe every life is precious and every life should be protected. Mothers and their babies. Let's love them and protect them all, right? And I don't think that's a difficult argument to make. And so, to your theocracy question, if I could just address that real quick, I have a Christian home. I run a Christian business. I have a Christian family. We have a Christian church. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with also having a Christian city or a Christian nation, depending on how you define those terms. I think with a broad, gracious, charitable, orthodoxy, historic orthodoxy, right? I don't think we want, what our founding fathers, they didn't want the Presbyterians persecuting all the Baptists and controlling the federal government. But I think a general Christian worldview and an explicit recognition that Christianity is the sort of the moral and theological grounding for our nation and its laws, which I would say it was. Certainly,
I have no issue with that. I have no issue with that.
Yeah.
I just believe God created three spheres: family government, civil government, church government. They work in cooperation. Amen. They're not supposed to be stepping on top of each other. They have different functions. And I'm not interested, as you said, having one denomination rivaling over another. And yet I know that, we go back to John Calvin in Geneva. We go back to what some of these people are talking about. I look at the New Apostolic Reformation and their 7 mountain mandates. And yes, I want to apply a Christian worldview to law, science, and media and arts and entertainment. But I'm not interested in having a bunch of, quote, prophets and apostles running around telling everybody what we got to do. And they're thinking that, and I was reading, quote, on the air last night in my study on Revelation here, as well as I mentioned on radio today, we got people like Bill Hammond and the late C. Peter Wagner talking about how the church needs to go out there and take the government. You can't overthrow the government of Satan, he says, without a government over your own. It takes a government to overthrow a government. And they're out there saying, we got to establish a Christian government. And then Bill Hammond says literally that the church is going to establish the kingdom of God on earth. And then we're going to turn and tell Jesus, come and receive your kingdom we've built. I'm like, do these guys not have Bibles? Because that's not in the Bible. Daniel 2, Jesus said, we read in Daniel 2 that God says he will bring his kingdom. It will crush Satan's kingdom, and of God's kingdom there'll be no end. We see also Jesus in John 18 says, my kingdom is not of this world. If it was, my disciples would fight to keep me from being turned over to the Jews. We don't build it in this life. I want Christian values. I want to be a constitutional republic, the laws of nature, nature's God. We have a framework we're not supposed to get outside of. William Blackstone said, this is what a constitutional republic is, what the divine is ruled on, we don't rule against. But I'm not interested in a theocracy that tries to establish the kingdom of God on earth, certainly not run by a bunch of weirdos of the New Apostolic Reformation, prophets and apostles, which have a lot of weird things going on. Some of them, their morals have been way off the rails. But anyone that reads Revelation 5, you see the God, which we taught last night, handing the scroll to Jesus, and he starts breaking the seals, and it's all going to lead to ultimately what I titled last night a global title deed and eviction decree. A global title deed and eviction decree. The Lord God is going to kick Satan out, going to send Satan and the false prophet and the Antichrist and his demons to hell, and he's going to restore this earth. Romans 8 tells us the creation groans for this, and he's going to establish that millennial kingdom. He's going to do it. Yet these guys run around thinking they're going to do what only God can do. In fact, I even have them saying that they will do this with a manifested sons of God, that they will be equal to Jesus, sinless, and that they will be like gods, for they are little gods. I'm thinking, how is that different than Word of Faith, Benny Hinn, Barbara Hubbard?
It's the same fountain, I believe.
New Agers?
Flows out of the same fountain, right? Yeah, I mean, I would denounce the New Apostolic Reformation, though there are some things that they teach that are good, and I'm thankful that some of them are standing up and preaching against things like abortion and the LGBT movement. But no, I think that they theologically are well off the reservation. I think I approach this from a more historic reformational theology, and I think that the theology of men like John Calvin and John Knox and others, as they influenced, of course, early America, and teaching of Lex Rex, right?
Yeah, I
by
love
Robert
that book, Samuel Rutherford. I love that book.
Yeah, and Abraham Kuyper, I think, talking about all of Christ for all of life. Jesus is Lord over all. So I certainly don't think I'm going to set up Christ's kingdom, but I think that Jesus set up his kingdom, and I think that he said his kingdom is like a mustard seed. It starts out as the smallest seed, but becomes the biggest tree. And so I would argue, we probably disagree on this point. I come from a more classical reformed view of civil government and eschatology. I'm more kind of in the post-millennial camp. Although, I think the historic pre-mill, the a-mill, and the post-mill views have all had times where they've been influential historically, and I think that they're all within a historic orthodox view. I don't think Christians should be beating each other up over those things, but rather working together, especially in our local communities, to try to advance biblical principles and advance the gospel and bring people to Christ and disciple them and have an influence over government, culture, law, business, all these realms. But and I think that's what our nation was really founded on. These men that helped build and establish our nation had a really deep theology. And Francis Schaeffer's great work, A Christian Manifesto,
absolutely
draws this out beautifully. And I think that theology is what is needed today, because too many evangelical believers today, too many evangelical pastors do not have a political theology.
Well, in fact,
right?
we got one out in California back in 2000, wrote a book, Why Government Can't Save You, called a bunch of these people rebel-rousing malcontents, said no matter how cruel, ungodly, unjust the government is, you're to obey them, that America's founding fathers sinned and violated New Testament principles when they founded America. You're just to submit. I mean, he calls America a democracy multiple times. But hey, when they shut down his church, Jason, during COVID, the man that told everybody, submit, 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 no matter how cruel, ungodly, unjust, well, when they couldn't pass the offering plate, this pastor sued. Now, I don't disagree with his right to sue. He was right to sue, but he shouldn't be telling the rest of us what we can't do, and then he turns around and does what he's told us we can't do. And I think, if 100%. I remember correctly, this is the same guy when Operation Rescue in the 80s came to Los Angeles, and he was asked by Vernon, or whatever the guy's chief of L.A.
Chief of police
in L.A., what do I do with these people? I'm told by credible sources, this pastor said, when it came to the pro-lifers sitting in the street peacefully protesting abortion, this pastor said, break their arms, which I think ended up happening, did it not?
Yes. No, John MacArthur, we just name names, right? I mean, John MacArthur is completely off on his interpretation of Romans 13, and said a lot of Baptists have been, which is unfortunate, because, you go back to the 1689 London Baptist Confession and some of the other things, that was not the view. I'm thankful for books like, for example, my father-in-law has a book, The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates, fantastic book that really lays out.
I did not know Matt Torello was your father-in-law.
Yeah. So Romans 13, I married his oldest daughter, and so his articulation of Romans 13 in there, I think, is excellent.
It is. We've had him on. We've promoted the book for years.
Amen. Excellent. And I mean, I think that really lays out a great, biblical political theology. Romans 13, as you said, we have the three realms of government that God has established: civil and family and church, and all of them are under the authority of God, right? Jesus said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey the things that I've commanded. And so, all authority belongs to Christ. And the only authority any earthly prince or father or pastor has is that which has been delegated to him by the Lord, and he's to do it in accordance with God's will and God's character and God's laws. And when he steps outside those bounds and becomes a tyrant, whether a tyrannical pastor or a tyrannical father or a tyrannical president, there is a just and appropriate time to resist that.
And it's in our Constitution, right? After not over trivial matters, but after a long train of abuses, we have the right to alter, abolish this government. And I think we're unfortunately approaching that. So let me say this in conclusion. Obviously, we agree on a lot of things. We may not agree on some theological, and we may not agree when it comes to eschatology. But we, I think, have showed tonight we agree on major things. And this is how it should go down inside the Christian church, right? We should be able to talk like this and say, I don't have to agree with your eschatology for us to be Christian brothers and agree on major issues. People often say, well, he's not pre-trib. I said, well, that doesn't stop me from being his friend or interviewing him or promoting what he's doing. He'll just figure it out, and we're on the way up.
Amen. Amen. None of us have perfect theology, and a little bit of humility and a little bit of charity goes a long way. So one thing we can unite on, I'll just close out with this, if I can give a quick plug.
Yeah, do it. I'll show your website.
We're working really hard to defeat these abortion amendments. And so some in your audience may not know that there are many states right now where they are going to be voting come November to legalize, well, to enshrine in their state constitutions abortion right up to birth in many of these states without restriction. Florida is one of them, Missouri, Arizona. Planned Parenthood said Arizona is their #1 priority come November. And we have South Dakota, Montana, Nebraska. So if we lose these states, and Brandon, this is the thing, you've seen this, right? The GOP has run abortion. And they're saying we can't win on abortion. And the sad reality is anytime abortion has actually been on the ballot, we have lost. We've done a very poor job of mobilizing the church politically. And so we have 3 months to really awaken God's people in these red states. I don't expect to win in some of the states like Colorado or Pennsylvania that have a blue leaning. But if we can't win, and if we lose Missouri, if we lose Florida, if we lose Arizona, the damage that is going to do to the trajectory of this nation spiritually. You think about in some of these red states, if we enshrine into those state constitutions abortion without restriction, what a devastating thing that is. And yet, conversely, if we can, in fact, mobilize the church, if we can see Christians by the thousands get out onto the streets, get out of the four walls of the church and out of their comfort zones, begin knocking on doors, distributing literature, showing up at events, and saying we have to defeat these amendments. Let's protect life. Life matters, and we win. I mean, what greater statement can be sent to the Republican establishment than winning?
The wrong name there.
Correct
Correct that name there, will you please, Reagan? Let me get the right website here. Operation, has that been there the whole time, Reagan? Okay. OperationSaveAmerica.org, OperationSaveAmerica.org. It is Jason Storms is my guest, OperationSaveAmerica.org. Jason, thank you for being with us. And again, I guess all I would say is go with 100% principled pro-life, and then I'll know where you're coming from.
It's perfect. I don't mind that term at all, brother. And thank you for having me on, and I appreciate the conversation. Look forward to talking further in the future.
I do as well. Tell Matt I said hello.
Will do. Thank you.
Jason Storms checking in his website, OperationSaveAmerica.org. Now, you see, he asked if he could come on, make his case. He did. A great conversation, right? I just don't understand why, some of these other people that I've asked to come on don't look at that and say, there you go. He's a nice guy. I'm a nice guy. We don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to agree on the same eschatology, end-time beliefs, to agree on some major, major issues. But a lot of these evangelical leaders, they won't do what Jason did and come on the program and make their case and let us talk. They don't want to do it. They'd rather sit in the tall grass and throw bombs. So anyway, I think that's very instructive what we did tonight and the way it should go down. Excellent.